Hello, everyone. Hey, Jason. How are you doing?
Hi. Happy Wednesday. I'm good. No, it's Thursday.
It's Thursday. I know.
Bad start. It's a really bad start.
So, backstory, everyone. We are back this week. Slight change. We're here on a Thursday and not a Wednesday because, you know what? We're both event props parents and yeah, something came up. So we had to deal with those commitments. And so we thought, you know what, let's do it on a Thursday. So thank you for joining us and being with us and hopefully understanding that. And, you know, this is the world nowadays. We're normalizing this.
Right.
But, you know, we know that we show up every single week. So, you know, if there's a variation in terms of days, that's not important. What's important is that we consistently show up every week here on the live. So Jason and myself, today, we are going to be talking about digital branding, but in specific terms, we're going to be talking about brand messaging. That's what we're talking about, brand messaging. So let me put that little banner up so you can all, whoever joins at any point, you know what we're talking about. So digital branding is a topic that we launched into a couple of weeks ago. And then we thought that it would be great to kind of break them down a little bit further. So me and Jason talked about brand personas and coming up with your brand persona for your brand. We also talked about colors. Last week's episode was super fun because we were talking about different colors and those kind of things and which brands kind of stood out in our heads, at least when it comes to colors and, you know, that association and how important that can be. So today we thought we would talk about brand messaging. And now brand messaging in general is, you know, kind of the overarching, I guess, term for all the words that are used by your brand. You know, it's the language, it's the phrasing, it appears on your website, on any kind of merchandise or products that are materials that you might have in your email marketing. So it's kind of also includes like product messaging, marketing messages, and everything in between. So it's like your overarching brand messaging. And we decided that we were going to kind of break this down into kind of the 5 components of brand messaging. Because brand messaging is more than just a tagline. It's not really even your brand itself, but it's kind of everything together. So we're going to start with the first point being knowledge of your USP. So what is USP, Jason? Bring it in.
Good question. So USP is your unique selling point, and this is really kind of what makes you different from your competition. You're going to be in a space, pretty much every space nowadays has competition. What sets you apart from the other organizations or people that are in your space? And that's your unique selling point. And it's really important to understand what your unique selling point is, because this is something that you need to make sure it comes across in your messaging and in your branding. So I don't know, for example, for those of you in the States, Walmart, right? Their unique selling point is their price. I don't recommend competing on price because that is a uphill battle. But that's a good example where you recognize Walmart. A lot of their communication, a lot of their messaging has to do with price because that's their unique selling point. So that's your USP, and that's really kind of what is your main value proposition. That's another term that we could also use for this. What what is the added value that you're bringing to people that contract your services or buy your products.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess I got three of the questions, if you were to sum it up, that you could ask when it comes to determining what your USP is, as Jason was saying, what makes you different? And that is the biggest piece of the puzzle. That's what makes you unique. What makes you different for your brand? What problem or problems does your product or your service solve? And why would someone choose to buy your product or service over someone else's, over a competitor?
Sure.
So these are kind of the three questions that you would ask yourself in that first point of knowing and figuring out and defining and refining what your USP is, which is your unique selling. What is that? What's the P? I always forget the P.
Point.
There you go. Unique selling points, because it's marketing 101.
And one other thing too is that a mistake that I see a lot of people falling into. Just 1 second. Yes, Paul? Yeah. That's a good one. All right. Yeah. Give me 5 minutes. There you go. So just one thing I see people falling into a lot of time is they focus on their features. So I don't know, like, no, ours is red, or ours is, I don't know, our service is fast, like, okay, that's more of a feature. What we really want to focus on is number one, something that's unique, because there's lots of services that are fast or respond quickly or do these things. There's a lot of products that are red. So number one is unique, but also like, what is the actual value it's bringing? Not just like, this is a feature, because there's a big difference between what is a feature and what's bringing value. I don't know if that makes sense, but really focus on what the value add you're bringing on. Don't just go listing all your features, because that's not interesting. Make sure you focus on the problem that you're solving. So not
because you could be the fastest at something, right? This is the thing. You could be the fastest at something, but what problem is that solving for your customer, So if you're the fastest at, for example, UPS, right? They say they're the fastest, for example, at getting the parcel there. But what problem does that solve, or what's that a specific pain point that they're addressing? And could it be that, well, you need to get, you need to get something there, spot bang on time. So it's kind of, that's the problem that it's solving. Not that it's the fastest, but it's solving that pain point that you have of wanting to have that confidence and trust that it's gonna get there at that point of time, and being able to deliver on that.
Exactly. So your message there would not be, we're really fast. Your message is, we can save you time, for example, because one is a feature and one is actually the value that you're getting out of it.
Exactly. So that is knowledge of your USP, which is the first thing and the first component that you should have in terms of your brand messaging. Second, we move into, obviously, we talked about this a little bit in the last series and the last episode, where we were trying to come up with our brand persona. And obviously, one of the biggest parts of your brand and your branding is having a solid understanding of your audience. It is virtually impossible to come up with a successful brand messaging strategy if you don't know who your messages are aimed at. So you need to know who you're marketing to, what do they care about and value, and the sort of language that they use and that they will respond to. So those are kind of the three things, right?
Yeah, 100%. And in fact, if I were doing this in chronological order, I'd almost start with your audience, because really understanding your audience is going to make you understand which value propositions work for them, right? So I mean, the understanding your audience, I know, like, it's always the same thing in marketing, right? It always comes back, who's your audience, but there's a reason for that, because it's just so important to know, who are you talking to, what do they like to hear, what are their pain points, what problems can you solve for them, what kind of language matches them. If your target market is a bunch of 15-year-olds, your language is going to be much different than if you're talking to a bunch of C-level directors that are 50 plus. So understanding your target is going to really help you get the right voice for your brand to put into the messaging that you send out.
Absolutely. And I think it's also important, I guess, specifically with this point, to understand that you might have more than one audience, right? You might have different demographics. You might have, for example, if you're an event supplier, right, Jason, if you have an event technology platform, for example, virtual event platform or a tech tool, then your audience is going to be on a wider scale, anyone that organizes a virtual event.
Right.
But then you can break that audience down into corporate event planners, event agencies that use that technology for corporate event planners, and then everyone else, kind of, right? So it's really understanding who are part of these audiences, who are going, and how they're going to respond to the messaging, how they're going to respond to the words that you're using, because every kind of position and role it's got certain tweaks to how different they are, and there might be certain sentences that make more sense or really sound more captivating to what, like a corporate event manager versus an event agency planner, so that's always important to understand, what would their kind of user journey and customer journey and user experience be in order for you to cater to, the messaging being spot on with your product or service for that specific target audience. So that's important.
Yep. And with that too, I mean, it's okay to have different personas within your target market. So, but it's important to know that it's really difficult to have one message that's going to hit every demographic. So if you do find that you have different demographics, probably some of your content, some of your copy, some of your blog posts, maybe target them towards that segment, and your tone might vary slightly on how you're writing that or producing that to match that specific kind of segment that you're targeting. So it's okay to have multiple ones, but the reason we want to understand what they're like is so that messaging that we put out matches what they want to hear.
Exactly. And I thought, this just popped into my head, but it's probably the best example for this in terms of different audiences is a hotel. You've got the leisure travelers, you've got the business travelers, and you've got the event professionals that come and attend events like the MICE market. So, your messages is going to be very, very different for each of those audiences. The images are going to be very different, the words that you use, the visuals, all of that, they're going to be very, very different. So it's important to understand that, so you can kind of cater the USPs for that specific audience in general for the brand messaging. The next thing that we move on to that's essential for, I think, any brand right now, especially, it's massive, and I think it's taken on a life force of its own, is the story. You need to have a story. You need to be telling a story. It's supremely important. Every brand has a story, but a good story told well is what can help customers connect emotionally with a brand. So that is important, and that should be at the core of your brand messaging strategy.
Yeah, and it's not easy.
No.
This is something that is really challenging. I mean, figuring out who your target market is a pretty straightforward exercise. Kind of deciding what your voice is, your persona, is a pretty straightforward exercise. Coming up with a compelling story for your brand is not easy. But it's really important, and it's worth the time to look into that, because once you know the story of your brand, that becomes part of your communication. The people in your organization or yourself, when you're talking, they have this story, this kind of the origin story of the brand behind them. And you look at Virgin has a great story behind it, right? The founder
has a great
KFC,
story behind it.
Exactly. And a lot of their messaging, and somehow, even if it's quite subtle, can be tied to that story. They have whether that's it's tradition. We got history, or it's Virgin. It's like the founder's adventurous. Find your story, work on it too, practice it, explain it to people, and see if it's compelling. And if it's not, tweak it. Like, your story doesn't have to be set in stone. And I think that's one thing with stories, is that I think a lot of people feel like they have to create some crazy new founding story like we read in Inc. magazine every day, and
Yeah.
it's not like that. But what people want to know is that you're real, you're authentic, and there's some sort of story behind your brand,
Yeah.
And work on it, talk to people, practice it, and see what starts to stick. And it is kind of trial and error, but it is a really important aspect of brand is having some sort of story. So I think it gives people authenticity and makes them trust you more.
Absolutely. And saying hello back to Mathieu, who's watching us on Facebook.
Hey,
So,
Mathieu.
hey, Mathieu, thanks for joining us. And so some questions that can help you out in terms of your story, if you're really trying to Jason obviously really hit the nail on the head there in terms of describing that and how, it shouldn't be something that's set in stone and very organic. Mm. And if you are struggling with trying to come up with, I guess, defining what your story is, you can ask your questions like, so why does your product or service exist? Right? Mm-hmm. You definitely understood that there was a need for it. What is that need? And so why did you come up with this product or service? Number two, how did it come to market? That's always an interesting story, how the journey was for you. Maybe you thought, okay, like Jason, for example, maybe you've attended a few events in the past, or you've had clients complaining about the fact that they can never get solid, trusted, good accommodation when they're going to festivals or big events like MIPIM and Lions in Cannes. And so you were like, well, look, this is a great opportunity. This is an actual direct pain point that I'm addressing. And, so we thought, okay, how are we going to do this? Right. And that's kind of led us to this journey. So that's important. Right. And then a third question you can ask is, what does it mean to you? That's extremely important. I think what it means to you is
a great question.
It really addresses kind of the foundations for why your business exists. What does it mean to you? Mathieu, for example, he's from Break the Ice Forum. Which is a group of MICE networking events that take place every year, every 2 months. And, I would say what Break the Ice Forum means to him, from having attended and knowing the team, is that, it's a wonderful way to bring buyers and suppliers together in a very intimate group. They're not a huge MICE forum. They bring together small groups of people for intimate networking, but also they know that the events, and every single time they have it, they include a CSR activity, something that's going to make a social impact in the community. So they bring people together, not just to meet and discover, but they also get together and they do something that's going to impact the community for the time that they have spent in that particular community. And to him, that means the world. And, everyone that attends knows that they're giving back somehow by attending. And I think, it's a beautiful vehicle to have, bringing people together to be able to do something like that. So that's a wonderful kind of, what does it mean to me, right? And lastly, what does it mean to your customers, the people that are going to use it? What is it going to mean to them? For me, the fact that I got to just do something I do on the daily, which is attend like a forum, but be able to, through that, help support a charitable cause, give back to a community, do something where I'm touched by someone, is huge. It's massive. It's something that I never would have done, So what are the customers going to get out of it? I think that's super important as well to ask. So those are the questions that you can ask.
Yep, 100%. Yeah, and you'll notice that what you did just there was you told a story, and it's much more interesting than saying, like, I don't know, if somebody asks me what is a Como, what do you do? If I were to say we provide corporate accommodation and venues for events.
It sounds like pretty much everyone other that does it, right? Exactly.
It's pretty boring, right? But if you start pulling in these little, these little aspects or these stories or these reasons and motivations and emotions and feelings, it becomes much more interesting, just much more interesting. And what you just did right there, talking about Break the Ice, you could have probably explained what Break the Ice does in a sentence. But instead, because they have these other stories around it, it becomes a much more interesting kind of line of thought and line of conversation that people will also remember. It's like if you have your story is not a unique selling point. I guess it could be if you have a really good story, but it's something that's unique that will help people remember your brand because, oh yeah, you're the guys that also do the CSR when you're on site, right? To help the local population. Yeah, we do. So the story can be such a powerful thing. We're humans. Like we our history comes from storytelling. That's how we passed on history until we could write things down. It was just telling stories, and it makes a lot of sense that you're going to be that your brand can really get a lot of value by having a good story alongside.
Absolutely. And that brings us to the fourth component, which is a clear goal. Obviously, you have to have a clear goal. What do you want to achieve? Because your messaging and your branding is going to get you there. So, it's not just great stories that help them. It's companies that are and businesses that are striving to do good things, resonate with a consumer. Because I think we're living in a time now where consumers and buyers are becoming increasingly socially conscious. So, if you have a goal that's aligned with that, for example, and I don't mean like financial goals, because yes, that's good to have and every business should have that. But it's more about how are you trying to change things with your service and your product, what is kind of the aspirational goal that you have with your brand? How are you trying to make a difference? Because you should have a goal like that, because that's what's going to give you purpose. And that's what's going to make everything that you do for your business, from branding to service to marketing to everything, so much more intentional. So I think it's really, really important to have that goal, that aspirational goal of how are you trying to change things?
Yeah, I agree. And that really forms a good part of your story too. And you said you brought up the P word again, purpose. And it's so important because if you have a business or a product or a service and your only purpose is to make money, that's it feels like a short-term goal. And I think when people see that your purpose is bigger than simply making a profit month on month, then that becomes a nice part of your brand. And we all, I think everybody I know is doing what they do, yes, to pay the bills, yes, to to eat, but they're doing it, but you're also doing it for another reason. And I think it's really a good idea to dig into that and really understand, okay, why am I doing this? What is the purpose of doing this, of selling this, of being in this kind of sector, and trying to incorporate that into your messaging.
Absolutely. And that brings us to the final thing, which is your brand messaging guidelines. Now, in order for you to execute a successful brand messaging strategy, you're going to need to bring everything we just talked about together and create guidelines. And why do you need to do this? Because it's at the beginning, it's kind of like your business plan, right? Everyone says, don't start a business without a business plan. You need to have some kind of a blueprint that you want to follow. And usually those with a business plan are going to be more successful because you've got this skeletal framework that you follow. And your brand messaging guidelines are exactly that. They're like the business plan or the plan and strategy for your brand messaging. And this is, you should have it as a document that you share with every single member of your team, because it has to be lived and written, and it has to sound and all of that from every single one in the team. Because once everyone knows what the brand messaging guidelines are, that's what they're going to live and breathe and be in terms of a brand ambassador for your brand as employees.
Yep.
So it's important to put that together. And so the kind of things that they should include, and this kind of, I guess, is some of the things that me and Jason talked about in previous episodes is, your brand messaging guidelines should include your brand's, obviously, we just talked about this, USP. It should include a detailed description of your target audience, as we just talked about, what your company stands for and its goals. Any slogans or taglines, super important, because obviously slogans and taglines now have this new thing where they become hashtags, right? So, they're kind of synonymous now with hashtags and with campaigns. So it's important to have those things in there. And then any other messaging that might be used will go into your brand messaging guidelines, your brand story, as we just talked about. And then what we talked about last episode was the tone of voice that should be used when writing messages for that brand. And that's including examples, so you can put down snippets of what, how should you be addressing your clients when you write an email? What does the web copy, your website copy sound like? And it should be the same, what your social media sounds like. And also your emails should sound like, you should have this overall tone of voice with your messaging. And also it should include any words and phrases that you don't want in your brand messaging. Super important, right? Because that sets the parameters and the limitations to what your staff, and your team and your employees can use versus what they shouldn't, because it just doesn't connect with your brand messaging, right? And then the last thing is, when these messages or tone of voice, when should they be used? This is interesting. I got a greater detail at this when I was doing this startup breakdown event 2 weeks ago. And our main partner and sponsor for the event was Fiverr. And everyone knows Fiverr. It's the largest freelancer marketplace. And it's brilliant company. I've used it many times. But they send over their brand kit, right? And in their brand kit, which is their branding guidelines kit, exactly. So when they work with external partners for events and things, everyone knows, okay, we've got these variations of our logo. And these are the times where you can use these logos. And these are the times where you can use these messages. And those are what your guidelines are. It's parameters. So really interesting to learn that as well. But this is kind of going to be your holy grail moving forward in terms of your brand messaging.
I agree. And I think it really does two things. Always doing this sort of exercise accomplishes two things. Number one is, when you go through this exercise, it gives you a better understanding of your own brand. Because I think you may think you know your brand, but you don't.
Exactly. And it will continue to evolve, but it's good to it's good to have a good solid foundation before that.
Exactly. Because a lot of these things we have in the back of our heads, I know how I want to design my my Instagram feed. Yeah, you know that, but does anybody else? It's really important to write these things down and go through the exercise, because you're actually going to learn a lot about your own brand as you write these things out. You're going to make decisions and put them in writing that you may not have made otherwise. And so when we're talking about messaging, like Sabrina said, it's not just the tone of voice and the phrasing and all that sort of thing, but also comes down to design. Your messaging has to do with, what kind of colors are we going to use when we design? Is our design going to be clean? Is it going to be a minimalistic? What types of photos do we like to use? You mentioned the logo. We, in our style guide, we say when to use logos and not. If it's going to make the design busy, we leave the logo out, for example. It's a small thing, but you do that exercise for yourself and you write it down. So that's step one. You'll learn a lot. And then number two, you make sure everybody's on the same page, because now your team or a team that's going to come in the future, or when your marketing person leaves and you have to onboard somebody else, the transition is much easier, because they see, okay, this is the brand, this is the Bible, this is what we go through. We see exactly what the steps are, when to do it, when not to do it. And so voice and design they're really, really important. And having it written down in a document, it's really invaluable. We go back to it all the time. We even talk about which fonts we're allowed to use within our designs. Even within we use a specific font within our Google Docs. So our
consistency is important.
Is everywhere.
Consistency is important.
Exactly.
Consistency
and
is
that
important.
Comes from the brand Bible.
Exactly, from the brand Bible. There you go. So we hope that you found this episode helpful and valuable. Drop any questions that you might have in terms of brand messaging, any comments, any feedback. Thank you, Mathieu, for joining us via Facebook. And for those of you that are watching the replay, please drop your comments in the comments area below. We'd love to hear from you. What you thought was most interesting versus, oh gosh, I didn't realize I had to do that. I'm going to be doing that now and going back to it. And how many of you actually do have a brand messaging guideline already set up for your brand?
That would be
good
super
to know.
Curious. Yeah. Let's see how many people actually admit to having one or not. I'm curious.
Exactly. We might even do a poll. You could do a poll. Let's see. Yeah. We'll do a poll on LinkedIn and see who's got brand messaging guidelines, at least in our industry anyway. But thank you all for joining us. We'll be back next week. I'm not going to say same time, same place, but I will say we'll be back next week. We're always here. We always show up, but we will be back next week. Exactly. Have a great Thursday and the end of your week. And we look forward to seeing you next week. Take care, everyone.
See you later. Bye. Bye.